A dozen everyday foods are slowly disappearing from store shelves, and most people only notice once prices rise or aisles start looking emptier. These aren't luxury products. They're basic staples used by millions of households every week. While most shoppers go on as usual, some people quietly stock up ahead of time, taking small amounts without drawing attention. They understand something many miss. Shortages don't start with empty shelves. They begin with higher prices and fewer choices, and only later turn into panic. In this video, we'll go through 12 items that are disappearing in this pattern. Stay until number 7. Because when its price changes, the impact is felt across the whole kitchen almost immediately. Number 12 is coffee. When times get tough, most people assume they'll start missing things like meat, bread, or sweets first. But give it just a few days, and you'll notice something different. What many people truly start craving is coffee. It's not about luxury or indulgence. Coffee is deeply connected to a sense of routine and normalcy. That simple morning cup helps people feel like life is still on track, like the day is unfolding the way it always has. Its story traces back to a well-known legend from Ethiopia. According to tradition, a goat herder named Kaldi noticed his animals acting unusually energetic after eating bright red berries. Curious, he brought them to local monks, who began experimenting, roasting the beans, brewing them, and eventually creating a drink that helped them stay awake during long nights of prayer. From those early beginnings, coffee gradually spread across the globe. Centuries have passed, yet one thing hasn't changed: the need to stay alert and focused, especially during uncertain times. Today, however, this everyday staple is facing more pressure than most people realize. A large portion of the world's coffee supply depends on just a few countries, including Brazil, Vietnam, and Colombia. If even one of these regions experiences a weak harvest, prices can start to shift. In recent years, multiple issues have hit at once. Brazil has struggled with both drought and frost. Vietnam has been dealing with prolonged heat and rising fertilizer costs. Colombia, on the other hand, has faced heavy rainfall, labor shortages, and ongoing shipping delays. When several key parts of the supply chain are under stress at the same time, prices in stores respond quickly. Over the past year and a half, wholesale coffee prices have, at times, surged by more than 70%. What used to be an $8 bag for 12 ounces is now closer to $11 in many places, and higher-end varieties can reach $14 or even $15. And there's another detail many people miss. Some brands have quietly reduced the amount of coffee in each bag while keeping the price the same. At a glance, nothing seems different, but in reality, customers are paying more for less. That's usually the point when people who prepare ahead begin to act, not by clearing out shelves, but by buying gradually and consistently. They recognize the early warning signs of a shortage: slowly rising prices, fewer options to choose from, and certain familiar brands temporarily disappearing. So instead of waiting, they start picking up what they need in small amounts over time. But coffee's real value goes beyond price. It's psychological. During power outages, severe weather, or financial stress, that familiar aroma can help people feel calmer and think more clearly. If you're planning ahead, it's smarter to store whole bean coffee and keep it sealed in a cool, dry place. By the time most people begin complaining about how expensive coffee has become, those who prepared early have usually already stocked up. Number 11 is honey. It's one of those products people tend to ignore, right up until the price climbs high enough that it finally catches their attention. Over just the past few years, in many parts of the United States, a large bottle that once cost around $8 has risen to somewhere between $12 and $15. If you're looking at pure or higher-end varieties, the price can go even higher. This isn't just random fluctuation. It's a clear signal that pressure is building throughout the supply chain. One of the biggest factors behind this shift is the bee population. Honeybees don't just make honey, they play a crucial role in pollinating many of the crops people depend on every day. But for years now, beekeepers have been dealing with ongoing challenges like parasites, disease, pesticide exposure, unpredictable weather, and the steady loss of natural habitats. As bee populations decline, honey production drops along with them. Another reason comes down to rising costs across the entire process. Beekeepers are now paying more for nearly everything: supplemental feed, transporting hives, labor, jars, packaging, and fuel. As diesel prices increase, so does the cost of moving honey from farms to processing facilities and then on to store shelves. Each step adds a little more, but in the end, it's the customer who absorbs the biggest increase. A third factor is the tightening of imported supply. For years, the U.S. relied heavily on honey coming in from overseas. However, concerns about diluted products, mislabeled origins, and inconsistent quality have led to stricter inspections and regulations. As cheaper imports become less available, stores still carry honey, but with fewer options and noticeably higher prices. That's exactly why people who prepare ahead tend to buy honey consistently, not out of panic, but because they recognize its true usefulness. It's a quick source of energy, requires no cooking, doesn't depend on electricity, and is incredibly easy to use. Even something as simple as a spoonful of honey can make plain oats more enjoyable, or turn a cup of tea into something more soothing. In stressful moments, small comforts like that can make a real difference. If you're planning to store it, all it takes is keeping it sealed in a cool, dry place, away from direct sunlight. Over time, honey may crystallize, but that doesn't mean it's gone bad. Gentle warming will bring it back to its usual consistency. In fact, archaeologists have discovered honey in ancient tombs in ancient Egypt that remained usable even after thousands of years. Long before modern refrigeration, people already understood just how valuable this food could be. And while many shoppers still pass by the honey aisle without a second thought, others have already made sure to stock up ahead of time. Number 10 is canned tomatoes. Imagine opening your pantry and seeing plenty of rice, pasta, and beans still sitting there. But somehow every meal starts to taste so plain that no one in the family is excited to eat anymore. When people prepare for difficult times, they usually focus on how much food they have. But those with more experience know the real challenge is being able to turn basic ingredients into meals that actually taste good. That's exactly why canned tomatoes are disappearing faster than most people expect. At first glance, they seem like nothing special, just inexpensive cans tucked away at the end of a grocery aisle. But in reality, they serve as the backbone of countless dishes. Think about it. Chili depends on them, pasta sauce relies on them, soups and stews wouldn't be the same without them. Even something as simple as white rice or beans can feel completely different with just a bit of tomato added in. It's an easy item to underestimate, yet it quietly supports a huge number of everyday meals. The issue is that the supply chain behind it is more fragile than people realize. In the United States, a large share of processed tomatoes comes from California. When that region runs into problems like drought, limited irrigation, labor shortages during harvest, or rising fuel costs, the impact quickly spreads to grocery stores nationwide. All it takes is one weaker season for processing plants to scale back production, and usually, the more affordable canned options are the first to be affected. Then there's the issue of packaging. Steel cans, metal lids, transportation by truck, and storage have all become more expensive. A can that once cost around 99 cents in many places has climbed to about $1.49, sometimes even more for well-known brands. On its own, that increase might not seem like much. But for families buying several cans each month, those extra costs build up faster than expected. People who plan ahead aren't grabbing them in panic. They're simply paying attention to what matters. They understand something that often gets overlooked. When money is tight, it's not about having expensive meals, it's about having meals that still feel satisfying. A single can of tomatoes can completely change what's on the table. It can turn rice and beans into chili, transform plain pasta into a polnatseni dinner, or stretch a small portion of ground meat into a sauce that feeds the entire family. In that sense, it doesn't just serve one purpose, it increases the value of everything else in your pantry. Canned tomatoes might not be the main attraction, but they're what makes so many meals come together. And that's something people who've gone through harder times tend to remember well. If you're thinking ahead, it's smart to keep a variety on hand: diced, crushed, and sauce, so you have more flexibility in the kitchen. Store them in a dry place and rotate them into your regular meals. There's no need to stockpile all at once. Just stay a step ahead, because by the time many people realize they still have food but nothing that tastes good, these simple cans are often already missing from the shelves. Number 9 is oats. When the economy starts to tighten, people don't suddenly stop buying food. They simply adjust what they choose. Gradually, they lean toward options that are more affordable, more filling, and better at stretching every dollar. That's when oats stop being just another breakfast item and turn into a go-to staple for millions of households all at once. At first glance, a box of oats seems too ordinary to ever run low. Most people assume it will always be there. But grocery markets don't operate on assumptions. They respond to supply, demand, and how people spend their money. As rent increases, utility bills climb, and fresh groceries become more expensive, families start cutting back on higher-cost items. Then they circle back to simple, reliable foods that still do the job. Oats almost always rise to the top of that list. It doesn't take long for that shift to have an impact. When millions of people begin making the same choice over a short period, store shelves start to reflect it quickly. What many don't realize is that oat production isn't as widely spread as it seems. A significant portion comes from Canada and the northern regions of the United States. These areas are vulnerable to weather issues like drought, unexpected rainfall, early frost, and even transportation disruptions. Just one weaker harvest can slowly tighten the market. First, you see fewer options, then smaller packages, and eventually higher prices. And that pattern is already playing out. Large containers that once sold for around $4 are now closer to $6 or $7 in many places. In some cases, brands have kept the same price but reduced the quantity inside. It may look unchanged, but in reality, customers are getting less for their money. There's also another factor that often goes unnoticed. Oats are no longer used only for breakfast. Today, they're found in oat milk, granola, energy bars, baked goods, and a wide range of packaged foods. That means multiple industries are now competing for the same supply. All of this directly affects everyday families. When budgets are tight, oats stand out as one of the few foods that are affordable, filling, heart-friendly, and suitable for all ages, including older adults. If prices rise too quickly or availability drops, the alternatives tend to cost much more. People who prepare ahead understand this, so they don't wait until demand spikes. Instead, they buy gradually while prices are still reasonable, incorporating oats into their regular meals. Because by the time most people return to oats as a way to save money, the shelves are often no longer stocked the way they expect. Number 8 is powdered milk. Last winter, a family living in the suburbs of the United States woke up after a long overnight power outage. Their refrigerator had warmed, and the fresh milk inside was already starting to spoil. At the same time, nearby stores were packed, with lines stretching across the parking lot. But tucked away in a kitchen cabinet, they still had a few bags of powdered milk. That morning, the kids were still able to pour milk over their cereal. The adults still had their coffee, and the overall mood in the house stayed calm. Very different from what many other families were dealing with. Moments like that are when people begin to realize the true value of something that often feels outdated or easy to overlook. Here's something most people don't expect. When systems start to falter, one of the first things to disappear isn't meat or bread, it's milk. And once fresh milk becomes scarce, powdered milk is usually the next item to rise in price and become harder to find. Many still think of powdered milk as something meant only for kids or short-term use, but that idea is no longer accurate. In reality, it's one of the most practical and strategic items you can have in a modern kitchen. It provides protein, calcium, and energy, and it can be used in multiple ways, whether for drinking, cooking, baking, or as a backup when fresh dairy is no longer available. The challenge is that producing powdered milk is more complex than it seems. The process involves removing all the water, drying the milk, and packaging it under carefully controlled conditions. That requires significant amounts of electricity, natural gas, machinery, and labor. So when energy costs rise, production becomes more expensive almost immediately. If there are labor shortages, output slows down. And when packaging materials cost more, retail prices increase as well. There's also a global factor that often goes unnoticed. Demand for powdered milk has been rising quickly across regions like Asia and Africa, where many countries rely heavily on imports. As international demand grows, it pulls supply away from domestic markets. That means availability within the US can begin tightening long before the average shopper notices. Until one day, the shelves suddenly look thinner. Prices have already reflected this shift. Many powdered milk products that were once affordable have increased by 25 to 40%. Some brands have also reduced the size of their packages while keeping the same price, making it less obvious that consumers are actually paying more for less. People who plan ahead recognize these patterns, so they don't wait for shortages to hit. Instead, they buy gradually while prices are still relatively stable, adding a little at a time. The best way to store it is in a dry, airtight container, and it's smart to rotate it into regular use rather than letting it sit untouched. No panic buying, no attention, just staying quietly prepared. Because by the time many shoppers walk into a store, notice the jump in fresh milk prices, and realize their usual options are gone, they suddenly remember there was a reliable alternative sitting on the shelf all along, and by then, there's often very little left. Number 7 is white rice. A man walked into a supermarket intending to pick up just a few items for the week ahead. As he moved through the store, he noticed the meat section had noticeably higher prices, and the egg aisle had started limiting how much customers could buy. But when he reached the rice section and stood in front of a 20-pound bag, he paused for much longer than expected. Just 6 months earlier, the price had been clearly lower. Now, the updated price tag told a different story. Without hesitation, he placed 2 bags in his cart instead of 1. It wasn't panic. It was the quiet realization that something fundamental was beginning to shift. The real issue with rice isn't what you see on the shelf. It's everything happening behind it on a global level. One of the biggest factors is India, the world's largest exporter of rice. In an effort to protect its domestic supply and manage food inflation, the country has restricted exports of several rice categories. When a major supplier like that pulls back, millions of tons of rice are suddenly removed from the global flow. That's not a minor change. It creates pressure across the entire market. Then there's the impact of extreme weather. Rice production depends heavily on consistent water supply, stable temperatures, and predictable growing conditions. When events like El Niño, droughts, or flooding affect key regions such as Thailand, Vietnam, or Pakistan, harvest yields can drop quickly. It doesn't take much. Just one weaker season across several of these regions at the same time can push global prices upward. On top of that, production costs have risen sharply. Farmers are dealing with higher expenses for fertilizer, diesel, electricity for irrigation, labor, and transportation. Fertilizer prices in particular surged following global energy disruptions, while fuel costs have made everything from fieldwork to delivery more expensive. As these inputs rise, maintaining low-cost rice becomes increasingly difficult. Even within the United States, the situation isn't immune. California continues to struggle with long-term water shortages, while Arkansas, the country's largest rice-producing state, faces growing pressure from fuel and transportation costs. All of this eventually shows up in the price consumers pay. A 20-pound bag that once cost around $15 in many areas has now climbed to $22 or more. Certain varieties like Jasmine and Basmati have seen even steeper increases. This isn't a sudden spike. It's a steady, ongoing rise that gradually puts more strain on household budgets. People who prepare ahead understand this pattern clearly. They're not buying rice out of fear. They're buying it because it makes practical sense. A relatively small amount of money can provide a large number of meals. It stores well for long periods, and it's something that will always be used. That's why, when markets start to feel unstable, those who understand the system don't rush towards snacks or luxury items. They head straight for the rice aisle. Because by the time everyone else starts to understand what's really behind that higher price tag, the shelves are often already looking much lighter. Number 6 is peanut butter. A lot of people walk right past the peanut butter section without a second thought, assuming it will always be there in full supply. It feels so familiar and routine that it's hard to imagine it ever becoming expensive or difficult to find. But in reality, it's often these everyday staples that first show signs when the system starts coming under pressure. In the United States, a large portion of peanut production is centered in southern states like Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and Texas. These areas are becoming more vulnerable to unpredictable weather patterns. Just one season of drought or excessive rain during harvest can significantly reduce output after a single crop cycle. But it's not only about how much is produced, it's also about quality. When peanuts are exposed to too much moisture, the risk of mold and aflatoxin contamination increases. If shipments don't meet safety standards, they're removed entirely from the food supply. That means a portion of the harvest never even makes it to store shelves. Shoppers don't usually see that side of the process. They only notice the result when prices start rising. Another layer of pressure comes from demand. Peanuts aren't used just for peanut butter. They're also a key ingredient in snack foods, candy, cooking oils, and a wide range of processed products. When multiple industries compete for the same raw supply, the effects tend to show up quickly in retail pricing, and that shift is already visible. Large jars that once sold for around $6 or $7 are now closer to $9 or even $11 in many places. Some brands haven't raised prices outright, but have reduced the size of their jars instead, so it appears unchanged while customers are actually getting less. What makes peanut butter stand out is how efficient it is as a food. Just 2 tablespoons provide around 200 calories, along with a solid amount of protein and fat. It doesn't require cooking, electricity, or any complicated preparation. You can spread it on bread, mix it into oats, blend it into smoothies, or simply eat it straight from the jar. When budgets get tighter, very few foods offer that level of convenience and value. People who prepare ahead recognize this, so they don't wait for shortages to happen. Instead, they keep an eye out for sales, use it regularly, and maintain a small zapas at home without drawing attention. Because when large numbers of people start shifting back to foods that are affordable, filling, and easy to use, peanut butter tends to disappear from shelves much faster than most expect. Number 5 is cooking oil. Many households do a good job stocking up on basics like rice, pasta, beans, and canned goods, but they often overlook one small yet essential item: cooking oil. It's usually only when the bottle is almost empty that people realize how many everyday meals suddenly become harder to prepare without it. Vegetables don't saute the same way. Eggs start sticking to the pan, meat becomes more difficult to cook properly, and even something as simple as instant noodles loses much of its flavor. Cooking oil tends to go unnoticed until it's nearly gone. But during difficult times, it quickly turns into something everyone depends on. One of the main challenges with cooking oil is that its supply relies on multiple sources at once. The bottle sitting on a store shelf could come from soybeans, canola, sunflower, corn, or palm oil. If even one part of that supply chain runs into trouble, prices can start to shift. When several regions face issues at the same time, the impact becomes immediate. For example, the Russia-Ukraine war disrupted a significant portion of the world's sunflower oil production. At the same time, drought conditions in parts of South America affected soybean harvests. On top of that, rising fuel costs increased transportation expenses, while bottling facilities faced higher costs for packaging, labor, and electricity. All of these factors eventually show up in the price of a single bottle. What used to cost around $3 or $4 has climbed to $5 to $7 in many areas, with larger containers seeing even bigger increases. At certain points, stores have even placed limits on how many bottles a customer can purchase, something that was once almost unheard of for such a common product. Cooking oil isn't just about preparing food, it's also a concentrated source of energy. Just 1 tablespoon contains more calories than many people expect. When money is tight, adding a small amount of oil can make meals more satisfying and help them keep you full for longer. It also plays a role in helping the body absorb certain vitamins from vegetables more effectively. So without it, meals aren't just less convenient, they can actually be less nourishing. People who prepare ahead understand this, which is why they don't wait for shortages to become obvious. Instead, they pick up an extra bottle when prices are reasonable and rotate it through their normal cooking routine. There's no need for extreme stockpiling, just keeping a modest zapas at home is enough. If you're buying strategically, pay attention to expiration dates, choose a size that fits your household, and store it in a cool, dark place away from sunlight. The goal isn't to overbuy and risk spoilage, it's simply to avoid being caught off guard when prices rise or shelves start to thin out. Because while many people focus first on items like rice or meat, those who really understand how a kitchen works often check their remaining bottle of oil first. Number 4 is pasta. If economic conditions continue to tighten over the next few months, one of the first sections that may start to look emptier on store shelves is dry pasta. It might sound surprising, but this is a pattern that often appears when households begin cutting back on spending. When budgets get tighter, people don't usually look for fancier meals. They look for meals that are efficient, affordable, and easy to stretch. Pasta sits right at the center of that decision. For just a few dollars, a single box can easily turn into a full meal for an entire family. Add a bit of tomato sauce, some ground meat, vegetables, or even just butter and garlic, and it becomes a complete dinner without much effort. In periods where people are carefully balancing rent, gas, and electricity bills, very few foods offer the same combination of affordability, fullness, and simplicity for all ages. That's why pasta tends to disappear, not because it's rare, but because demand spikes when too many people return to it at the same time. Behind that simple product, however, is a supply chain that's more sensitive than it looks. Most everyday pasta relies heavily on durum wheat. In recent years, major growing regions like Canada and other agricultural areas have experienced drought, heat waves, and reduced crop yields. When the cost of raw wheat rises, factories can't hold prices steady for long. On top of that, there are additional pressures. Packaging materials like paper, electricity for production lines, fuel for transportation, and labor costs all continue to increase. Consumers usually don't see any of that behind the scenes. They just notice that a box of pasta that once cost about $1 is now closer to $1.79, or that familiar brands priced around $1.49 have climbed above $2.50. Individually, those changes might not seem dramatic, but when you multiply them across a year of regular shopping, the difference becomes significant. There's also another side to pasta that people often overlook: psychological stability. Not every day requires a perfect or elaborate meal. Sometimes people just need something simple, predictable, and reliable. A pot of hot pasta cooks quickly, carries little risk, and is usually accepted by both children and older family members. In a time when many things feel uncertain, that kind of consistency has real value. People who prepare ahead understand this well. They don't wait until shelves are empty. They buy gradually when prices are reasonable, take advantage of sales, and rotate pasta into their normal meals. Because when millions of households are all reaching for the same solution, something cheap, fast, and dependable, the pasta aisle tends to empty more quietly than most people expect. Number 3 is dry beans. Some products are never placed in the spotlight in a supermarket. There's no flashy advertising, no special promotion, nothing drawing attention to them. Yet whenever life becomes more difficult, these overlooked items often turn into a lifeline for millions of households. Dry beans are a perfect example of that. They don't create excitement when they're added to a shopping cart, and no one usually brags about buying another bag. But when meat becomes more expensive, egg prices start fluctuating, and every grocery dollar needs to be carefully managed, beans start to feel very different. They're no longer just a side ingredient. They become a serious alternative source of protein. Their real strength isn't just their low cost, but the way they can support a household for a long time. A single bag can stretch into many meals when combined with rice, pasta, vegetables, soups, or used as a filling ingredient. That means the same amount of money can create far more meals compared to most other foods. That's why demand for beans often rises quickly when economic pressure increases. However, the supply isn't as risk-free as many assume. In major growing regions like North Dakota, Michigan, and Nebraska, farmers still face the same recurring challenges: drought, unexpected rainfall, rising fertilizer costs, and higher fuel prices. Since beans are an agricultural crop, they are just as dependent on weather conditions and production costs as anything else grown in the field. After harvest, another layer of expenses appears that most shoppers never think about: drying, sorting, packaging, transportation, and storage. It only takes a few of these stages becoming more expensive at the same time for a once cheap bag of beans to turn into a noticeably higher-priced item. Many one-pound bags that used to sell for around $1 are now $2 or more in many areas. The increase may look small on paper, but the important point is that even one of the most budget-friendly foods is no longer staying stable. What makes dry beans especially important isn't just nutrition. It's the sense of security they provide. When people open their kitchen cabinet and see they still have food that can be turned into multiple meals, it creates a feeling of stability and calm during uncertain times. That emotional reassurance has real value. If you want to avoid doing what most people do, it's better not to wait for shortages before getting familiar with beans. Start with a small amount, try a few simple recipes, find what works for your household, and gradually include them in your regular meals. Good preparation isn't about buying as much as possible. It's about learning how to use something before you actually depend on it. Because when millions of people start looking for protein that is affordable, long-lasting, and filling, dry beans quickly stop being the item everyone ignores. Number 2 is canned tuna. A lot of people assume canned tuna will always be easy to find because it's small, inexpensive, and has quietly sat on grocery shelves for years without much attention. But in reality, it's one of those products that can be surprisingly sensitive when the global system starts to come under strain. And the biggest reason isn't the can itself, it's fuel. Tuna isn't caught close to shore the way many people imagine. A large portion is harvested far out in the ocean by fishing fleets that stay at sea for weeks or even months at a time. These vessels run on diesel, and their refrigeration systems also depend heavily on fuel. So when oil prices increase, the entire supply chain behind canned tuna immediately feels the pressure. Even a sharp rise in fuel costs can add tens of thousands of dollars to a single fishing trip. As a result, some boats reduce how often they go out, while others stay in port waiting for more favorable conditions. Before most consumers even notice anything changing, the amount of fish being landed starts to decline. Then another layer of costs comes into play. Once the fish is caught, it still has to go through processing, cutting, cooking, canning, labeling, packaging, and distribution to stores. At every stage, expenses keep building. Higher steel prices make cans more expensive to produce. Labor shortages slow down factory output. Rising shipping costs add even more pressure by the time the product reaches supermarkets. All of this eventually shows up in the price on the shelf. Cans of tuna that once cost around 99 cents to $1.25 are now commonly priced between $1.79 and $2.79 in many places. In some cases, brands keep the same price but reduce the amount of tuna inside the can. What makes this product so important is its convenience. It solves a real problem at exactly the moments when people are tired, busy, dealing with power issues, or simply don't want to cook. You can open the can and immediately have a ready source of protein. If you're buying it wisely, the strategy is simple. Watch for discounts and rotate it into your regular meals instead of letting it sit untouched. Because by the time many people realize they don't actually have a shortage of food, but rather a shortage of ready-to-eat options, the tuna aisle is often already looking noticeably emptier, and has been that way for a while. Number 1 is butter. The final item on this list isn't the most expensive or the rarest product on store shelves. But the moment its price rises, or it starts to disappear, the impact is felt across the entire kitchen almost immediately. That item is butter. Butter isn't just another ingredient. It's what transforms everyday food, making bread richer, eggs more flavorful, mashed potatoes smoother, and simple meals noticeably more enjoyable. Most people only truly appreciate butter when they open the fridge and realize the last stick is almost gone. A common assumption is that a butter shortage simply means there isn't enough milk. But the reality is more complex than that. Milk collected from farms doesn't go into a single product. It gets split between cheese, cream, yogurt, drinking milk, and butter. When costs rise or companies adjust priorities for profit, processors often focus on products that bring higher returns. In that situation, butter can end up lower on the priority list. In other words, having enough milk in the system doesn't always guarantee that butter will be plentiful. On top of that, butter depends heavily on a cold chain, from production facilities all the way to supermarkets. When electricity, fuel, and labor costs increase, the entire system of refrigeration, storage, and transport becomes more expensive as well. Consumers never see the refrigerated warehouses or the cold trucks behind the scenes. They only notice the updated price on the shelf. As a result, butter that once sold for around $3 to $4 now often costs between $5 and $7, and sometimes even more, depending on the location. During busy periods like the year-end holiday season, prices can rise even faster as baking and cooking demand increases sharply. In some cases, shoppers arrive at the store and find that only the higher-priced options are left. What makes butter so important is its ability to instantly improve almost any meal. A small amount can take something simple and turn it into a dish that feels more complete and satisfying for the whole family. In times of financial pressure, that kind of improvement matters more than most people realize. No one can fully control what happens in the world, but everyone can control how they prepare for what comes next. Every item you bring home isn't just food, it's also a bit of stability and peace of mind for your household when things around you feel uncertain. There's no need for drastic action. Small, consistent steps are enough. One bag of rice, a few cans of tuna, a jar of peanut butter. Over time, these simple choices build real resilience. Preparation isn't about fear. It's about taking care of the people you live with today. And when difficult times do come, the strongest person isn't the one with the most money. It's the one who thought ahead and acted early. If you're still here, it simply means you're already thinking in the right direction. Keep building that sense of stability for your family, starting with small, steady steps.